you must remember that every artist, a writer working in a medium, a visual graphic medium like this, is conscious of the language of his times. In order to communicate with your audience, you must talk in their language. Film has become very much a part of our language or our understanding. Film was a very, very important literary communication form in the 30s particularly, albeit black and white, but it was very important. The photography and camera work was beginning to become extremely sophisticated. It was in those years that they developed what they called Rembrandt lighting and moody shadows and so forth that came out of the Fritz Lang movies and so forth. Now, all those things I was aware of, and I realized that that was part of the language I'd have to use to communicate.
His filmic abilities, redefining the viewpoint by just taking your eye and putting it wherever you wanted to for the dramatic intent of the story. Well, it was like somewhere the foundation had been laid for me to understand that you could do this, but I would never have done it myself without seeing his work. As soon as I saw his work, I went, oh, I get it. Now I know what you can do. And every once in a while during the years, which would have been like 22 years now, the first time I've seen the work, I'll go back to it and remember that you can do anything in comics, because it's comics. And he has done it all in his own way. And he's opened the door and just rolled the carpet out for anybody who wants to. Just jump, go, run, have a great time with it. Yes, that's the kind of influence. Whenever I start feeling a little tame, I'll remember, wait a minute, if Will Eisner were doing this, we wouldn't see this dull panel here. We could just, we'll stay outside the window looking through the bars and watch the drips of the water and tilt it to the side and then have a shadow of somebody on the wall. It's reflected in the mirror, right? And it's all in the eye of a fly or something. Terrific.
I believe that comics are a third communication form. There's text with words only, there's film, and in between the two are comics. And comics is a more than an art form. It's a literary form. It's a literary / art form. I think of myself these days as a writer who writes with pictures. I've learned how to draw well, and I'm skillful at it now after many years of practicing. But the purpose of my artwork is to write, to tell a story, to communicate an idea.
When I was a kid, the spirit appeared. Now, I don't really know if this has anything to do with Will's politics or not, but the spirit appeared, at least in New York, in a very radical newspaper. And I come from a radical background. My father would not buy the Journal American, which had a fabulous Sunday section. It had Flash Gordon and everything, but he wouldn't touch it because it was a right-wing rag. But he did buy the paper that carried the Spirit because it was very radical. So I didn't get to read Flash Gordon, but I read the Spirit every Sunday. And God, was it easy to love. My father would bring home the paper. I'd grab the Spirit section. His women, again, as a little girl who relates to females, all little girls relate to females, all little boys relate to males. His women were so strong that I could read. I just loved the comics. And then his work is simply easy to read. You talk about communicate. I forget about Reagan. Will Eisner is the great communicator.
Eisner wrote and drew the Spirit, but eventually 7 pages in 7 days started to require some help. Nancy, do you know who worked with Eisner on the Spirit? Nancy is my computer, Nano Cyber 3000, Nancy. Some illustrious names there. As time passed, the comic strip evolved. Some weeks the Spirit wasn't even involved, as Eisner and his team focused less on adventures and more on human emotional stories. Will, why the change?
I'll tell you the reason for it. It was very simple. I grew up. One of the things you must recognize is that the artists working in this field, those who write and draw, do grow up.
Eisner began to put limitations on himself as a writer and an artist. What if the Spirit spent a whole story tied up in a chair? Or what if the Spirit solved a case while he was unconscious? By constantly putting up these kind of walls, Eisner kept discovering new doors. By changing the borders, he managed to change and find new shapes. By creating problems, he discovered solutions. Will, was there a big difference when you left the Spirit and started working on longer stories?
Yes, indeed. It was, a matter of fact, it was a great relief. I was suddenly without any boundary whatsoever. I could write at any length I could. I've spent many years working within 7 pages, where I had a story that had to be tailored each week to fit the 7 pages. Sometimes the story was very thin and I had to stretch it, and sometimes I had to condense it. But my problem always, I always had more ideas that I could cram into any one story. In the graphic novel, there was suddenly a huge freedom. I could go as long as I want, and there was no one there to tell me how long I could go. The thing about the graphic novel is that it gives you an opportunity to develop depth in the characters, to develop dimensions in characters. And it's one of the things really I'm working on now. I feel that that's one of the areas that have yet to be fully explored and exploited. And this is really what I'm working on. It's not so much the visual that I'm concerned about anymore. I'm concerned about the character dimensions and character analysis. And that's the advantage of the graphic novel.
People like Will Eisner who, you know, as much as maybe some of the things being done today might be considered on the cutting edge of something new and exciting and a different twist, or taking the medium to another height or level, or you know, reaching that, it being called an art, which I believe it should be, you know, instead of like funny books as people look down on it. People like Eisner and Kirby, they were the cutting edge. They created this world that we exist in, and showed so many possibilities, and you know, instant. I mean, it was so raw, and nothing came before. It was like this just blast out and do all this stuff, and the huge range and all the different things that were going on, and the way different ways of telling storytelling and stuff. It's you know, I couldn't say enough about it.
After the Spirit, Will Eisner began working for the United States government, developing programs that used comic books to teach.
When I got into the Army, I had an opportunity to introduce the idea because I got involved in training, and I suggested the use of this as a training medium. It was a fairly easy sell because the Army in those days were grasping for anything they could get. It was instantly very successly.
What advantages do comics have that other forms of teaching materials don't?
It transmits ideas at the speed of sight, if you will. I can invent a word. I had some experience overseas in the Far East during the Korean War and later on the Vietnamese War when I was over there. And I found that the manuals or the instructional booklets that were produced in this medium had the distinct advantage of transcending language barriers. And they conveyed ideas without having to worry about translation. That was very archaic. For example, the Koreans when had no word for automobile headlight when I was there. In the case of doing a booklet for repairing a headlight, they called it candle and rice bowl. But when they saw, when I could do it visually and explain it to them, the mechanic learned very quickly.